So, we have been walking through Matthew chapter number 13, and it's all about parables. Jesus is teaching about the selective nature of his teaching, and he teaches the multitudes in parables. And the whole series began with us exploring just one chapter before, Matthew chapter 12, how that he showed more favor, more attention to his own followers than he did his own family. And the reality is that if you want a relationship with God, you don't just get in, right? You actually have to become a follower of Jesus. You can't just be part of the family, right? As I've often told kids growing up and in church, just because your parents are Christian, just because your granddaddy's Christian, just because maybe your dad founded the church, you don't get to go in by simple inheritance. You actually have to know Jesus personally. Now, he's using parables, right? And parables to teach these principles, the fact that of his selective nature and how he communicates. Now, tell me, as we keep reviewing, what is the definition of a parable? Very good. I'm going to mess it up. A commonplace story teaching an uncommon principle. He's using things we all know, we all understand, even today, but especially then, that the masses would have understand instantly to teach something very important and very uncommon. Now, what is more commonplace than the schoolyard game of finders, keepers, losers? Yeah, that's something that's a tradition as old as time. This is a time-honored rule of the schoolyard. I doubt anyone needs any explanation about this game, about this adage, right? We all understand. But just for the sake of argument, the idea of finders, keepers, losers, weepers is you find something, you get to keep it. It's been abandoned. Apparently nobody needed it. And so now it's yours. Now, we can look at this and we can laugh, we can joke, we can kid to ourselves, and we can almost think that this is just like a mere a children's game. We'll be inclined to almost laugh it off if we don't realize that. Is everything all right up there? Sorry, guys. Oh, is it? My head is cut off, huh? You can zoom out. There's a little button on the top there. Is it good? All right, 1 second. Here, go. Watch this. Here we go. There's a button right here. Tell me when it zooms out. A little bit more. There you go. All right, good. Sorry about that, guys. That's distracting. All right, we're good? We're in frame? We're in frame? All right. Well, I'm glad we're in frame now for my online audience. Thank you. Thank you for those in the back pointing that out. That would have frustrated me, too, at the end if I would have looked at the video and been like, my head is cut off. All right. So, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. We can look at this and think that's just child's game. We can look at that and think, you know what, that's just what kids do. But the fact is, this principle of finders, keepers, losers, reapers, reapers, wow. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers is found actually in today. And there are many significant parallels in real world examples of this principle. I was in looking this up. I came across there's actually a song by Elvis Presley that is entitled "Finders Keepers," talking about how he found the love of his life, and how he's not going to let her get away. Right? She is the only one for him. In maritime law, so of course we're by the coast. We all understand boats, and oftentimes there's shipwrecks, right? And in olden days, if you came upon a shipwreck and maybe all hands were lost, or there didn't seem to be any real owner, you found it, you get to keep it. Now, that's changed in the modern era, right? That's no longer the case. If you actually do find salvage, you're supposed to bring it back. That is the law. But if you bring it back, you get what's called a finder's fee. And that's oftentimes people can actually make a business at salvage at sea by doing this. In our own history, President Abraham Lincoln signed a Homestead Act of 1862. This permitted American settlers to lay claim to a portion of land west of the Mississippi. Right? This was a great expanse in American history. And we went out there, and they could claim up to 160 acres for their own simply by going out west. All told, there was something like 270 million acres that were claimed by the end of this. I think it was like 2 or 3 years later that they finally closed this. Now, finders keepers. This principle actually dates back as far as the 2nd century. There is actually documented evidence in Rome. One jurist by the name of Gaius talked about how any unowned property, and I quote, becomes the property of the first taker. Way back since the 2nd century. 400 years later, an emperor, a Roman emperor by the name of Justinian, proposed that any property that had been purposely abandoned was the rightful property of any individual who found it. So yeah, this is a schoolyard game, isn't it? Right? Kids would oftentimes do this, no matter where they are. But this is actually ingrained in our natures. If it's discarded, maybe it's been lost and you found it, guess whose it is? Yeah, it's yours. The whole point of finders keepers is the idea that something valuable. No one wants trash. We can find trash. I picked up trash today when I was walking in. Nobody wants trash. But if I were to find a $100 bill just in the wild, it's mine. Right? Finders keepers, losers sweepers. Everyone loves a good treasure hunt story. One of my favorite stories when it comes is the movie comes from Nicolas Cage in National Treasure. You ever seen that movie? It's one of my favorites. Second one, Book of Secrets, isn't nearly as good, but the whole premise of the movie of National Treasure is the fact that Nicolas Cage and his cohorts have to steal, of all things, the Declaration of Independence, and they do this to keep it from the bad guys. But in the course of it, they discover there's a hidden map on the back of the Declaration of Independence, and it sends them on this chase where they end up under a church in New York City, and they find this buried treasure that was lost to the ages. Everyone loves a good treasure story, don't you? In fact, I actually thought tonight, when I get home, I'm going to watch that movie. Because it's something really exciting about finding a map that X is, with a map that, X marks a spot where there is buried treasure. Well, guess who also understood this about our nature, about human nature? Jesus. You're like, Pastor, where have you been going this past 20 minutes? Feels like 20 minutes. Jesus also understand about this idea that when something is lost and you find it, that person gets to keep it. Jesus used the metaphor of what I'm going to call tonight the finders keepers treasure hunt to give us a sense of how valuable the kingdom of heaven is. You want to understand how valuable the kingdom of heaven is. Jesus uses finders keepers, a treasure hunt story to teach you. Let's read Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. Again, he's teaching in parables. He's teaching the disciples at this point. And he says the kingdom of heaven is like a what? Treasure hidden in a field which a man found and then hid. And for joy over it, he goes, sells all that he has, and buys that field. Cool. Again, he says, verse 45, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, plural, who, when he had found the one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. And you're like, Pastor, that's just 2 verses. We're going to talk about 2 verses for the rest of the night, and you're absolutely right. Jesus is highlighting a key principle. But before we get to that key principle, before we get to the takeaway, the narrative, I want you to follow the narrative of this story follows on 3 plot points. Something valuable is found. In this case, the first case, it was just a treasure. We're not told what it is, but a treasure hidden in the ground, or a pearl of great price. Something valuable is found. Then, something valuable is sold. Both characters in this story, in this parable, go and sell everything in order to then purchase, to take, to keep what they found. Something is found, something is sold, then something is obtained or bought. Now, let's look at these 2 characters individually. Let's look at the 2 kinds of finders. Jesus says there's 2 kinds of finders, specifically in this passage we're going to talk about. The first kind is the lucky farmer. The lucky farmer. This describes me, right? Anything good I have in my life, including, especially, and my wife. I was lucky, right? I am lucky. And here, this story of this farmer tilling a field, he finds a treasure. In this first instance, the man found a treasure hidden by sheer luck. Didn't know, he wasn't looking for it. The only reasonable explanation for why he was even in the field is that he was just a hand. He was a hired hand. He was just an employee, somebody who was hired to till up the ground. Now, interestingly, finding buried treasure then was far more common than it is today. Like today, we have things like banks, right? Where you can hopefully put your money in and get it back. But it's far more secure today to secure your finances than it was then. The only way, surefire way that they found to secure finances back then was to bury it. Well, even today, like I like coins, I like oldish coins, and even today you can go online and find coin brokers, and they typically will have a description underneath the coin you're about to buy that was found unearthed by a farmer in this region of Rome or whatever. And because typically what would happen is, say you have marauders, you have bandits, you have an enemy state coming in, the people see them from afar off, they don't have time to carry everything, so they just dig a ditch, throw everything in there, and then hopefully they can come back and find it later. They're going to retrieve it later. This is why, though, sometimes it doesn't happen. People die or they get forgotten, they get lost to the annuals of time. Now, famously, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when I say the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you don't know who that is, it's a bunch of dusty old pages, parchments, rolls that found in the Middle East that had contained many of what the Bible was written. This was early in the 1940s, 1950s, I think. And they found these scrolls, and in fact, among it was a complete scroll of Isaiah. And that's really good for us Bible nerds because we can see these were written over 1,500 years before. So, in fact, 400 years before the time of Christ, roughly, is the oldest one that's dating. And we can now look to say, what was Isaiah? How did Isaiah read 400 years before Christ? And you want to know, specifically with Isaiah, they're a one-for-one match. It's really fascinating. Dead Sea Scrolls, I could go on all night about the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're really quite amazing. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls weren't just Bible things. They had lists of rules. They had a list of regulations, just common ways of life. This is how you broker a debt with your neighbor. This is how you deal with a drunkard at a party. I mean, like, it's really quite specific. But among those was something called the Copper Scroll. The Copper Scroll. They found this, and as you probably know, do you typically make scrolls out of copper? No. Anyone want to hazard a guess, given the context of what we're talking about, what this Copper Scroll, what was the information on the Copper Scroll? A map. It's a treasure map. That's exactly what it is. I kid you not. They found this, they started to decipher, and they realized that somebody in this community, the Qumran community, before Rome was coming in, they were starting to decimate the area, so they were going to hightail it out to survive, and somebody sat down and etched where they put this amount of gold, this amount of precious stones. This is so famous, it's become more famous than anything else in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And still today, they cannot find this treasure. This is as close to a genuine treasure map as you're ever going to find. They're still today trying to decipher where these caches of precious stones and money and other treasures are found. Now, why do I tell you all of that? Because Jesus is talking to a bunch of farmers. He's talking to a bunch of people who perfectly understand the only way that you're ever going to keep something is you bury it. But it's very likely that you either A, forget where you buried it, or you won't be able to come back. You maybe die, and it's just lost there. And all of a sudden, the farm changes hands, and one person owns the field, but guess what? They don't know they don't know what's in the field. And so you got this farmhand. He's just plowing the field. And all of a sudden, he comes across, think about something like this, just a vast array of treasures buried underneath the ground. And he doesn't tell anybody. He pushes the dirt right over top of it. Now, we can argue at this point how moral that really was, right? Because he was an employee, okay? This was really technically his employer's ground, whatever. So, but this is not Jesus' point. Are we here supposed to argue about the ethics of whether he should have told the employee or not? No. The reality is what he did. He covered it back up. He went home and he sold everything he had. Came back and bought the field just so that he would have a rightful claim to the treasure in the field. Did he care, church, about the field itself? No. He cared about the treasure in the field. This is Jesus' point. Regardless of the morality or the ethics of this man, he sold everything. The point Jesus is trying to make is not an ethical practice, but one who finds buried treasure. He's simply drawing attention to the actions of the man after he found it. It's about what he did. It's not about the morality of what he did. Just the action itself is significant. He found a valuable thing. This then caused him to do something unthinkable. He sold everything just to possess it. Now, I'm going to give you an example. You promise not to judge, because the example's about me. Because we're talking about a morally gray area. When I wanted to date my wife, I got close to one of her friends. Now, I made it clear, I thought I was not interested in this friend. I was interested in her friend, right? Emery. But there's possibility that this friend thought that our relationship was going to go one way, and she didn't realize that I was possibly, under certain circumstances, maybe using her to get towards Emery. Now, you can stone me later. I would never, but the reality is, as much as she was a sweet lady, and she's married now, and she has a fantastic family, so it all ended well for her. The reality is, I didn't care how I wanted to marry that woman, and I did. And I made it very clear to Emery from the very first conversation we had. We sat at a picnic table, and I explained to her that I don't play games. I was never one to date around. Never wanted to wait. As harsh as this sounds, never wanted to waste time. Right? If I was going to marry somebody, I was going to marry the one I wanted to date, and I didn't want to play games. And so I wanted to tell her this from the very beginning, wife. Emery, not at that time, wife, but Emery, I was like, I love you. I want to do this thing, and maybe marriage. I used the M word, right, in the very first conversation, and she just sat there, like this, like, who is this crazy person? Listen, I'm a man, as you can probably tell by now. I'm a man of passion. I'm all in with everything I do. I'm usually all in, and I wanted her to see. This is the idea. He didn't care about the morality, the questionable morality of how he got this treasure. But the thing is, he was going to do everything in his power to get it. Because he realized he was just really lucky, wasn't he? There's not going to be another field come along. Not going to be another field come along where he's just all of a sudden raking and he finds another treasure. This was rare. And he was going to take every opportunity he had to get that treasure. But then Jesus talks about a dealer. Not just any dealer, a vigilant dealer. Someone who's looking, someone who is specifically trying to attain something. In the second story, the treasure was actively sought out. The farmer, he was just lucky. But the guy who's looking for pearls, that's what he was looking for. And he doesn't just find pearls, plural. He finds the pearl. The one he's been looking for his entire life. In this case, the pearls were being sought out by what Jesus called was a merchant. Now, given the Greek word used here in Matthew, it seems that Jesus meant someone who was a roaming wholesale dealer. This would have been something like a diamond broker. Someone that was his business. To know, to buy, to sell, to trade pearls. He would have been able to look for the specific thing he would know. If you ever seen a real guy, someone who really knows his work as far as jewelry is concerned, all they have to do is just look at it. They don't need to test it. They just look at it and they know that this diamond is X pure or whatever. Here's this guy. He knows his business. Now, he contrasts with this other dude. This other dude was just a farmer. Relatively speaking, poor by comparison. This guy was wealthy. You're talking about someone who was a dealer of fine jewelry, right? So this guy, though, was looking for not just a pearl, he's looking for a pearl that would be very expensive. See, the lucky farmer sold everything he had, and that only amounted to the fact that he could buy one field. Okay, but this guy, if he wanted to, sold everything he had, he could buy many fields. Again, you see Jesus is telling a story here. He's starting at basics. He's starting with the common principle, but then he's upping the ante with every single story. Now, notice he didn't find many pearls, but as I've said, he's found the one pearl. And when he did, he promptly sold everything he had to purchase this one pearl. This is no doubt would have been a sizable sum, as we've already talked about. Very, very valuable. He was willing to sell his business. Understand this. Imagine a diamond broker, someone who is in the business. Jesus is implying he sold his business, he sold his pocket change, he sold his retirement, he sold everything he had to purchase this one pearl. Again, just like we can maybe question the lucky farmer's morality in attaining his field, we can now question the sanity of this vigilant. It didn't make sense. Dude, you buy and sell pearls for a living. What makes this one so special? In both stories, though, the farmer and the merchant did all that just to possess their treasure. Did you notice this? Now, one can argue that they were then, the vigilant dealer maybe would to purchase the pearl to then sell it later. You could say that. You could also say that about the lucky farmer. He bought the field so he could take the treasure and then get a profit. But Jesus doesn't tell us that. He tells us they did all of that not to simply buy then sell, but to possess. There was no ulterior motive to increase their own standing. Jesus does not say that they then sold it after they bought. Especially considering we're talking, though, are we talking about a treasure in a field? Really? Are we talking about pearls, as valuable as pearls or diamonds or precious jewels may be? Are we really talking about that? No, we're talking about what? The kingdom. We're talking about entrance into the kingdom. And I would argue, if one were able to purchase their way into the kingdom, they would not then sell it later, would they? Now, I only need to say this simply because there's a little head in the back. Only because I think of maybe somebody's watching online and thinking, hold on, I can do something to get into heaven? And the answer is no. Okay? That would go against everything in Scriptures. And I think you would know that. Hopefully those of you watching online, you know this. You cannot earn your way into heaven. So what, if Jesus isn't talking about earning your way into heaven, what is he talking about? Here's what he's talking about. What's the takeaway? What's the point of these two stories? The point is this: no price is too great in order to gain the kingdom. In other words, once you have the kingdom, you hold nothing back. Jesus said it earlier, actually, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. We just talked about this. Blessed are the what? Poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. When you come to God and you have sold everything. In other words, you come to God and you think of yourself as nothing. You own nothing. You can bring nothing of valuable to God. When you stand before Him as a poor beggar, guess what He gives you? Yeah, the kingdom. Entrance into the kingdom. He gives you a hidden treasure in a field. He gives you not just pearls, but the pearl of good price. Do not think, though, that this is a strange thing. In fact, we see this principle, the fact that someone is willing to pay such a high price for something else. We see this every day. We see this in how maybe people, whether it be on Facebook or maybe like the debate yesterday, we see people willing to sacrifice everything for whatever they want. Power, money, sex, it doesn't matter. You look at an athlete. This is the thing I never understood because I was never an athlete. But you look at athletes who push their bodies to their breaking point. I have a teen of mine right now. She is on her way possibly to be part of, no, she is a part of the Olympic sport. She's going to try to be the very first female to compete in the decathlon in the Olympics. And her name is Jordan Gray. She's a Christian young lady. She is a stand-up. I am so proud to even have known her. But one thing about Jordan Gray, being around Jordan Gray, especially when she was a teenager, was that every time she played basketball, every time she played dodgeball, it was 100%. And the boys, we always kid with her. No, the boys didn't want to play with her, right? Because they would be trying to guard whatever they were, soccer. It doesn't matter what it was, and they would just shy away like little girlies, right? Jordan Gray was that, but she was an athlete. She was built to do this. And I follow her on Instagram and Twitter, and I text her every once in a while. Emma and I do, just praying for her. I'm so proud because she holds this really high personal standard, but it's coupled with her Christian ethic. They go hand in hand, and I'm so proud of her. But here's the thing I never understood. I never had a desire like that to win. She had the competitive spirit. And she would just go. We see this in athletes even today, whether it be in football or baseball. They sacrifice everything in order to win. Think about artists, whether it be musical or whether it be actual like art. They sometimes become recluses, right? They become eccentrics. They become hermits, right? In pursuit of their craft. That is the only thing that matters to them. So when I talk about the fact that no price is too great in order to gain the kingdom, this is something we know intuitively. If we really want something, like I really wanted to marry my wife, nothing was going to stand in my way. When you really, really want something. The problem is, most people don't want the kingdom. They're willing to settle for half-best. They don't understand the true value. Jesus says, no, don't be like that. The disciple would willingly sacrifice fame. They would willingly forfeit and lose. They would even give up their own craft as an artist if it meant that the kingdom itself would be proclaimed all the more because of their sacrifice. They would do that all joyfully as well. Did you notice that we don't see this in the merchant, the pearl dealer, but especially when it talks about the lucky farmer. He was happy. He went to the pawn shop with everything he had. And the pawn dealer's like, what are you doing? He's like, man, I'm selling everything. Isn't it great? And the guy's like, I guess. You crazy, man. No, see, the disciple comes and sacrifices not begrudgingly, but joyfully. Like the actor, the athlete, or the artist, the disciple does not bemoan his sacrifices, but willingly and freely gives of themselves for the kingdom. Jesus is not talking about earning your way into kingdom. However, he is talking about self-sacrifice. Your willingness to say, nothing is going to keep me from serving Jesus. I'm going to sell everything I have and follow him. As if I'm pursuing him and I already have him. This is Jesus' point. You give everything. And if you ever think that you are truly sacrificing, if you listen to me, and this is me, I'm talking to me, I'm talking to you, I'm talking to everybody online. If you ever truly feel like you're sacrificing anything, you have lost what the true value of the kingdom is. You have forgotten. Because if our prize is the kingdom, there is no such thing as a sacrifice. Truly. Truly. You would do so willingly to give to God anything out of compulsion or guilt is simple proof that we do not truly understand what we have in God. In fact, while we're not told the emotional state, as I said, of the merchant, we are told of the emotional state of the farmer, and he was happy. He gladly sold everything. Now, why is that? That's a good question. Why? Well, I kind of talked about why, but how could he simply be joyful? The guy was now destitute. He sold everything for a field with treasure in it that he didn't mean to sell later. He just wanted to have it. It was mine. He was just happy. What, are you crazy? Are you a crazy farmer? Because knowledge of God, hear me this evening, my goodness. Hear me this evening, that knowledge of God is worth all the treasures and is worthy of every sacrifice. Knowledge of God is worth every treasure and worthy of every sacrifice. In fact, Job has an entire chapter devoted to the idea that wisdom of God is the most valuable thing in all the world. For the sake of time, for the sake of time, we're not going to read everything, but we're going to read Job 28, verse 12. He's writing, he says, "But where can wisdom be found?" You're going to go on a treasure hunt. You're not going to look for jewels, not going to look for the Declaration of Independence. You're not going to look for the copper scroll of Qumran. You're not going to look for anything, but you want to go on a trip, a treasure hunt for wisdom. And he says, where can you find it? Where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its value, nor is it found in the land of the living. Oh boy, we're kind of out of luck. So if you were to dig up all of the ground and all the earth, if you were to go into every cave, if you were to look at every treasure hunt, and you were to find all the jewels and all the wisdom, all the jewels and all the treasure and all the world, you would still lack knowledge and wisdom. Because all we have is this. The land of the living doesn't have wisdom. The land of the living doesn't have understanding. We don't even truly understand the true value of it. Verse 14, the deep says, it's not in me. I love that. The deep parts of the earth. Think of the core. That's what Job is saying. The core of the earth, you ask it, hey, do you have wisdom? And he's like, not sorry. And the sea says, it's not with me. You go out to the ocean over here and says, hey, sea, ocean, do you have knowledge? He's like, nah, I don't got it either. Verse 15, it cannot be purchased for gold, nor can silver be weighed for its price. It cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir and precious onyx and sapphire. Neither gold nor crystal can equal it, nor can it be exchanged for jewelry or fine gold. No mention shall be made of coral quartz, for the prize of wisdom is above rubies. Want to know what's more expensive? I had told this, it's an old adage. What's more expensive than education? Ignorance. You're going to pay twice as much and work twice as harder if you simply don't know a thing. Right now, my sump pump at the house is on the fritz. And I don't know how to do a sump pump. And I can either figure it out, or guess what? I can call somebody who knows how to do it. It may cost me a little bit extra, but it is a whole lot easier. Here's what he says. For the prize of wisdom is above rubies. You can't put a price tag on knowledge. Verse 19. The topaz of Ethiopia cannot even equal it, nor can it be valued in pure gold. Just a side note, Job goes on like that for an entire chapter, something like 30 some odd verses. So if you want to go back and read it, that's all he's talking about. The fact that you cannot put a price tag on wisdom. Now, likewise, we see this principle throughout the book of Proverbs. Trying to estimate the worth of wisdom is like trying to estimate the value of a solar system. Knowledge from God is simply incalculable. It is like the light of a star in a sea of darkness. You cannot put a price tag on wisdom. And that's just any wisdom. Imagine if you were to try to put the price tag on the wisdom that Jesus offers you freely. This is why Proverbs chapter 2, verse 4 says that we ought to search for wisdom as if she were silver and some hidden treasures. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 15, she, wisdom, is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare with her. When I first started pastoring, I would have given anything to have the wisdom of a 50, 60, 70-year-old pastor. And every day, every week, I am reminded of how inexperienced. You probably also have seen it too. Man, I love my pastor, but woo, man, he needs some experience. Listen, I would pay anything to have the wisdom of a 60, 70-year-old pastor. But that's not how it works, is it? This is knowledge. You cannot put a price tag on knowledge. The true disciple of God considers service to the kingdom to be of supreme importance to the exclusivity of everything else, and they do so with a joyful heart. You are willing, to the exclusivity of everything else, you are willing to pursue Jesus. When my wife decided to go to Bible college, my father-in-law did not understand at all. tried to pressure her into taking a community college gig. And I'm so glad that she followed Jesus. That she found that, no, my calling in life, she said she wanted to be in ministry in some way. I got to go to Bible college. That's where God is calling me. I'm not called to make money. In fact, we see the characteristic in Jesus' own disciples. The same thing my wife decided when she was just 18 years old. We see the same characteristics throughout in Matthew chapter 4, verse 20, verse 22, Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. We see these disciples of Jesus dropping everything they have, their livelihood. Matthew, a tax collector, decided, you know what? I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm done collecting taxes. I'm going to leave it all behind in pursuit of this Messiah. However, famously, there were many who were called among there were many other disciples, many other individuals who were also called to be disciples, but who famously refused Jesus. Did you know that? Luke chapter 9. Now it happened as they journeyed on the road. At this point in the ministry, the 12 are there. Jesus is healing sick people. He's teaching a bunch of things. And so he's created, as we said, quite a following. And as they journeyed on the road, someone said to him, Lord, I will follow you wherever you go. That's pretty good. What does Jesus say? Verse 58, and Jesus said to him, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He's not like, okay, come on. He looked into that man's heart, a woman's heart, and said, no. You want a comfortable life, and if you're going to follow me, I don't even have a bed to sleep on. Then he said to another, follow me. So now he comes to somebody. Somebody came to him and said, I'm going to follow you, Jesus. Jesus is like, sorry, I don't got a bed. That guy leaves. Then he comes to another, just like he did to the other 12. And he says, hey, you, follow me. What's his response? Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead. But you go and preach the kingdom of God. How shocking. But Jesus' point is this. Is your father even sick? Are you just waiting for him to keel over? How long is this going to take? Don't you think I know your father? Don't you think you're using him as an excuse? How many of my friends, how many people growing up in church, kids growing up in church, simply didn't follow where Jesus was leading because of their family? And another said, Lord, I will follow you, but let me first go, bid them farewell who are at my house. But Jesus said to him, no one, not someone, not 30%, no one, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. If you're constantly looking back, wishing you want this life, Jesus can't lead you where you should go. Literally the embodiment of the word was standing before them saying, follow me. He was the treasure in the field. He was and is the pearl of great price. And saying, I am more valuable than anything you have. Follow me. And they're like, sorry. Yeah, maybe another day. This is Jesus' point. The sacrificial pursuit of a singular goal is the mindset of a disciple. He's like a horse. He's got blinders on and he's just looking forward. It was the mindset of the farmer. It was the mindset of the merchant. It ought to be the mindset of every disciple in the sound of my voice, both here and online, that you care the most about following Jesus. In fact, to give God our all isn't simply the expected thing. See, it made sense. Remember what I said, parables, commonplace story teaching an uncommon principle. Everyone hearing those stories understood the rationale between the lucky farmer and the vigilant merchant. They all understood. Every one of them would have done the same exact thing. It was the expected thing. But also, it's the only truly rational thing we can do. Not only is it expected of us, when Jesus stands before you and says, follow me, it is expected that you instantly start following him. That's not only the expected thing, but that's also the only rational thing you can ever do. Paul says in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable, which is your what, church? Reasonable service. It makes sense. It's the only sane thing you can do. To do anything else is to be irrational. And do not, verse 2, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may what, church? Prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Why are you here? Why are you as a disciple? What is your purpose for living? It is to prove to others, to prove to this world, whether by your life or by your death, that God is good, that He is acceptable, that His will is perfect, and it's better than anything they could ever do. They are the insane ones. You're the only sane person on the planet. It is the only reasonable thing any person can do is to follow Jesus wholeheartedly. Yes, while the world might think we are crazy. Isn't this ironic? The world thinks we're crazy. The reality is that we are the only truly sane, rational, and reasonable people around. We who care for this world because we will live on in the next. We who consider others before ourselves because one cared for us before there was even an us. We who willingly lay down our lives for others because Jesus laid down His perfect life for imperfect people. This is the rationale behind the Christian. We do this because it makes sense. It makes sense. Yes, the world itself is insane. We alone are the only truly sane ones. We alone have found the hidden treasure buried in the field and the pearl of great price that we have been searching for so very, very long. Jim Elliot famously said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." That man died. He was a missionary to Ecuador, and he was killed. He was a bush pilot, flew into Ecuador trying to reach this unreached people group, and he lost his life because of it. And we look at that, and we rightfully say that was a sacrifice. It truly was. It truly was a sacrifice. But in Jim's own words, it was also the most sane, reasonable, and rational thing for him to do. There is no alternative universe where Jim Elliot doesn't become a missionary. And if there was, he would become a missionary every single time because it is the only sane, rational thing one can do. And he would have died right where he died. Because of his sacrifice, the gospel was opened up to the Ecuadorian people. They brought the gospel because of his sacrifice. Do you think if he were to stand here today that he would say, "Man, I wish I would have made a different choice"? Jim Elliot was the lucky farmer in the field. He found a treasure. Its name was Jesus. He was the vigilant merchant, the dealer, looking for the one meaning for life. You hear this all the time. What's the meaning of life? And the answer is Jesus. What's the big answer to the biggest question all of us ask? And the answer is Jesus. And here's Jim Elliot saying, "I found Him. And I'm going to give everything to pursue Him, even my own life." This is Jesus' point, that when we truly, truly, truly understand the value of the kingdom of God, nothing stops you from obtaining it. And the ironic thing is Jesus gives it to you freely. You pay nothing. Nothing. And you get a kingdom. So what's the point here? Is why do we as Christians think, "God, I'm going to give you this later. God, you can have my Sundays, you can have my Wednesdays, but that's it. You can have 10% of my finances. You can have, okay, I got 2 kids. One I like pretty well, the other one not so much. So you can have the one I don't like so much." Why is it that we try to play the broker, the negotiation game with God, when the reality is God says, "Look, if I set a price tag, I haven't, but if I set a price tag on the kingdom, you would stop at nothing to attain it. No price is too great in order to gain the kingdom of God." And that's 2 verses. 3 verses, 4, 5, 45, 44. This is what Jesus is looking at the disciples. And he's saying, look, you have truly sacrificed everything to follow me. But I want you to know your sacrifice is more than worth it. The return on your investment is far greater than anything you could have earned on your own. You're just a lucky farmer and a vigilant dealer. You just happen to find what I put there for you to find. Father, I love you. Lord, I pray those under the sound of my voice that we would truly see the value of the kingdom. Lord, when I, as a pastor and as a Christian and as your son, start to feel like I'm truly sacrificing anything, God, I pray that you would remind me of the value I have in Christ. Lord, that there's no such thing as a sacrifice when you are the gain. Lord, I thank you, Father, for so many in our history, like Jim Elliot, who have paid the ultimate price. But Lord, I know as well as my people here tonight that we all would do that gladly if it meant that we could follow you just a little bit further. Lord, I pray that as we go home tonight, that as we are Christians, as we are moms and dads and brothers and sisters, as we are husband and wife, that we would come at this life knowing that it's all for you. That we don't just give you a percentage of our day. We don't just give you a percentage of our finances. We don't just give you a percentage of our life, but we give it all for you. I love you, my Jesus, and I thank you, and I may pray. Amen.